Everyone knows that in any translation of a story, there are bound to be elements that are lost in translation. Yes, all languages are equally capable of expression, but sometimes words represent a cultural element that's just not present in the target language. You can't expect to translate things like honorifics or niche references without it being a little awkward, so there's always going to be a certain level of interpretation. But when I started reading manga to practice Japanese, I noticed something interesting. Just the unique writing system of Japanese allows the language to provide nuance that cannot be carried over in translation, certain details that can only be found by reading between the lines. If you clicked on this video, you probably have at least a surface level interest in the Japanese language, at least enough to understand how Japanese is written. But if you're totally new to this, let me break it down for you. Most Japanese is written with 3 different alphabets: logographic kanji symbols, which convey meaning, and 2 syllabaries, which convey pronunciation. Hiragana is usually used to phonetically write words of Japanese origin, and katakana is used to transcribe foreign words. Kanji is a different thing entirely. Kanji only show the meaning of a single character, which means that the same symbol is pronounced differently in different languages. Because only the meaning is conveyed, the pronunciation of these characters, or rather the multiple pronunciations, must be memorized. Over 2,000 of them before graduating from junior high. Because of this, many Japanese novel and manga, especially those aimed at younger readers, have little pronunciation guides called furigana next to some or all of the kanji. This is similar to how new words introduced in textbooks have pronunciation guides written in parentheses. Using these different writing systems, Japanese manga authors have the freedom to write their dialogue in a non-standard way, which can add depth of meaning. For example, in the rehabilitation training arc of Demon Slayer, Inosuke loses his voice from screaming so much. To indicate that his voice hardly even sounds like a voice anymore, his dialogue is written in the script that is normally used to write onomatopoeia, katakana, in the places where hiragana would normally be used. In the Japanese version, we're meant to be surprised along with Tanjiro that Inosuke is speaking in a weird way, but in the English version, they just use normal text. Another example that made the rounds in the Chainsaw Man fandom is when Asa and Denji are yelling "Shine" at each other. Asa is speaking with kanji while Denji just uses hiragana. I personally feel like this indicates that Denji isn't really thinking about what he's saying and is just rattling off an insult, whereas Asa definitely means it. In the English version, they use a rougher-looking font for Denji to preserve the idea that the 2 characters are saying the same word in different ways. Now let's talk about furigana. At first glance, they don't really seem to add anything other than a pronunciation guide for younger readers. However, some interesting choices can be lost in translation when the furigana says something different from the kanji that it's paired with. Now you're probably wondering the same thing that I was. The whole point of furigana is that it's a pronunciation guide, right? Why would it say something different than the word that it's paired with? Let's say you're an author coming up with a unique term for your fantasy setting. It could be a country, a species, technology, magical abilities, rituals, whatever it is. It's a word that doesn't exist in English. You can make a word in a fictional language, but that might leave your audience unsure of what the word means. If you just use an English word, though, you may sacrifice some of that fantasy vibe. This is where deep furigana comes in. Deep furigana is when an author writes a word in kanji, but writes a non-standard furigana to go along with it. This adds more depth of meaning to the fictional term. To illustrate this idea, consider this scene from Avatar: The Last Airbender.
He said that Prince Zuko's challenge of the general was an act of complete disrespect. And there was only one way to resolve this.
Agni Kai. A fire duel.
That's right.
If this were a Japanese manga panel, they may choose to write fire duel in kanji, but show that the pronunciation is Agni Kai. This can be used to solve the problem where some characters explain the meanings of things explicitly, even though everyone is already familiar with the term. Some famous examples of fictional terms that have deep furigana readings include stand from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. The furigana reads sutando, but the kanji says yu hamon or ghost ripple. Automail from Fullmetal Alchemist. The furigana reads otomeru, but the kanji says mechanical armor. Emperor Time from Hunter x Hunter is written with the kanji zettai jikan, or absolute time. In Spy Family, the nations of Westalis and Ostania are just written with the characters West Country and East Country. In Frieren Journey's End, all of the spells with an untranslatable name have deep furigana. For example, the spell Zoltrak is written Hito korosu maho, the magic that kills people. When these terms are translated, only the pronunciation is printed, not the meaning. This is what I mean when I say that all languages are equally capable of expression, but that sometimes cultural differences can get in the way. In shonen manga, all of the kanji have furigana readings next to them anyway, so these non-standard readings don't look at all out of place. It would absolutely be possible to translate the meaning of these terms into English and include them in the dialogue, but we just don't really have a precedent for that in our comics, so the end result would look a bit off. But I don't think that just because they aren't translated means that they're completely disposable. The author didn't need to assign kanji to these ideas. There are plenty of authors that just write their fictional terms in katakana and move on. So when an author does decide to put kanji to a word, it always makes me wonder why they felt that the meaning was worth communicating directly. And it's kind of fun to interpret the intention. The true meaning of Westalis and Ostania's names just simply being West Country and East Country highlight the fact that the only true difference between these peoples is one of cardinal direction. The countries have way more in common than they'd want to admit, but they are defining themselves based on being on the west side or the east side. That is to say, defining themselves by not being on the other side. In the case of Fullmetal Alchemist, the decision to include the kanji for armor in the word automail makes a more direct connection between Edward and Alphonse's experiences after their human transmutation attempt. And in Frieren, while Zoltrak is undoubtedly quite powerful, it's also quite simple. It's not controlling blood or creating tornadoes or shapeshifting, it's just kill. A meaning which is fitting for the direct and ruthless nature of the spell. In JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, the name Ghost Ripple or Yu Hamon is clearly a reference to the Hamon technique from part 1, but your guess is as good as mine as to what Araki was trying to say with that. While these uses of furigana are noteworthy, something that I find even more interesting is the second use of furigana that I found, when it's used to convey nuance of meaning for something that is not explicitly said. When Roy Mustang's character is first introduced in Fullmetal Alchemist, he's discussing a train that was hijacked by political extremists. The extremists wrote a manifesto, which Mustang supposes is full of insults for the military. Next to the word military, the furigana ware ware, meaning us, is used, showing that these new characters represent the military that is being criticized. But one particularly noteworthy example of this is in the first chapter of Spy Family. I think it's one that illustrates pretty well the way that furigana could be used to show a character's inner feelings and thoughts. So after Lloyd saves Anya from kidnappers and he tries to part ways with her forever, he reflects on his reasons for becoming a spy in the first place, remembering his own childhood and how deeply traumatizing it was growing up in a war-torn country, illustrated by his younger self wailing in misery, surrounded by the rubble of his city. He remembers that he became a spy to create a world where children don't cry. But next to the word for children, kodomo, even the hiragana has a furigana. The furigana shows that kodomo is actually read jibun, or oneself. So what he's actually saying is, to create a world where I don't cry, I became a spy. These are the kinds of details that are even lost on native Japanese speakers if they choose to only watch the anime and not read the manga. All of these examples are really just scratching the surface of what you can find when you read a manga in the original language. If you've read manga in Japanese and have seen some interesting uses of the writing system, let me know in the comments. And if you like what you see, follow for more linguistic and world-building analysis.